Hello friends, acquaintances, and enemies of all ages, my name is Combat Bird, and this week we'll be going over Iconoclasts, a metroid-vania platforming game that tries to take a genre uncommon in today's market and bring it back into popularity. Does it succeed? Let's find out. In Iconoclasts, you play as a young silent protagonist named Robin, who is not only an incredibly helpful and friendly character, but also a skilled mechanic. Now, this wouldn't be an issue normally, but Robin lives in a world that is run by a religious group known as the One Concern, who punish unauthorized mechanics with death. This typically doesn't stop Robin though, as she will go above and beyond to help someone in need. The game revolves around her adventure through the world, as she meets new friends, faces new enemies, and helps anyone that deserves it. Being that this game is a metroid-vania 2D platformer, you'll quickly find tropes of the genre. You run around various landscapes, exploring areas, solving puzzles, fighting enemies, and collecting power-ups. But it's not about whether or not Iconoclast does any of these things, instead it's whether it does them right, and if it attempts to do anything new or interesting. First of all, let's focus on the aesthetic. When you have a game that's going to force you to stare at the landscape for hours on end, you want it to be pretty. And Iconoclast does this perfectly. Everything in this game is an absolute treat to look at. Robin herself has a large amount of personality in her animations that really add to her as a character. The enemies are also varied and interesting, and not a single time during my playthrough did I say, oh boy, here's volcano turtle thing number 573, because between areas you almost never see the same enemies at all. I feel that 2D platforming games especially have a tendency to overuse enemies, so this was a nice surprise for me. And the landscapes themselves are all top-notch as well, each one feeling completely unique from the last. Even the extra particle effects, such as snow falling or leaves blowing in the wind, feel like they had a lot of care put into them. This may have a tiny bit of bias in it because I'm a sucker for pixel art, but at the same time, that tends to make me more judgmental of it. So in this case, just know that Iconoclast is absolutely beautiful. Now of course, having a good looking game does not mean that it gets a pass. The game has got to be fun one way or another, and this is another thing Iconoclast gets mostly right. Let me first preface this with the fact that I have never been a huge fan of metroid-vania-styled games. I love fighting enemies, I love interesting stories, I hate spending hours exploring an area just to find out that I can't progress because I missed an item from that one room 10 minutes back. Maybe I'm just bad at them, who knows? But regardless, that's how I felt during my first couple of hours during this game. During the scripted story moments, I loved it, and really became enthralled with the characters. During the combat, I had a good time. But during the dungeons, it felt exactly how I just described. I felt the areas were huge and that I would spend all of my time getting to a room just to find out that I couldn't progress anyways because either I didn't have the power up yet or didn't collect all the keys or so on. Now you may be thinking, okay, so you didn't like Iconoclasts. Well, no actually. I don't know what it is, if it was just something that clicked in my head or I suddenly got better at it, but about 2 hours into the game, it really started to pick up. I went from having an okay time to not being able to put it down. You see, the game is really broken into 3 main segments. Exploration, which includes things like fighting small enemies and solving puzzles. Scripted parts, where we get to see our characters interact with one another and learn more about the story. And boss fights, which are pretty self-explanatory. And it was at this point that these 3 things really started to flow together, making the game feel more cohesive. As you progress through the game, Robin gets new weapons, as well as upgrades for her handy wrench. Enemies have a variety of methods you can use to defeat them, and it's a lot of fun trying to figure out what's most effective. These tools also come in handy for maneuvering around the world. Instead of the traditional run and jump simplicity we've come to expect from the genre, Robin can use a power shot downwards to gain vertical momentum, and use her wrench to swing around or later in the game ride along these power line type pathways. It's this mix-up from traditional games that helps it feel fresh. Another thing I wanted to quickly mention was the writing for this game is phenomenal. It's witty, it's humorous, and yet, it can still suck you into its story and has surprisingly deep character development. The game really plays with your expectations as well. For example, after being thrown into the ocean with all hope lost, Robin is picked up by some friendly strangers who come in to save the day. And then, they say never mind and throw you back into the ocean. It's these little moments where the game got my attention the most. You never know what to expect because the game is totally fine playing with your emotions. You can go from an incredibly funny conversation between 2 characters to a very saddening story or occurrence in the blink of an eye, and I loved it. Alright, the last piece of the 3 portions of this game, as I mentioned, are the bosses, and they actually did a really good job with them. This is also kind of surprising once again, because bosses in 2D platformers can tend to be either overly simple or they repeat the same mechanics in each fight, but not a single boss in this game feels even remotely close to the others. You have some where you have to interact with the environment while fighting against a giant mechanical monster, or others where you must play safe till you've memorized their pattern, then strike when the time is right. The variety here is great, especially considering how many different bosses there are. Oh, and on a quick note, the final boss of the game, which I will not spoil here, is one of the most intense and greatest boss fights I've played in a video game in a long time. Now, while I seem to be praising this game to no end, there are a couple of flaws I'd like to mention. Firstly, quite a few of the puzzles feel silly. Now, I know that's a little vague, so let me explain. Take this small, 1-block tall gap in the wall. Robin can easily crawl through this gap. It's shown numerous times, it's used in a million puzzles. However, Robin cannot climb into one of these, despite it being obviously tall enough. You have to be standing on equal footing with the gap. There are lots of little situations like this where you think, why am I not able to do it this way? And I think that's kind of the worst thought you can have when solving a puzzle. You see a solution that should work, but that would make the puzzle too easy, so the developers say no, you can't do it like that. The other reason some of the puzzles, or more specifically I should say segments, feel silly, is that damage boosting in this game can be absolutely overpowered. I understand that you want the player to have invulnerability frames, but look here, I completely butcher what I'm supposed to be doing here, but it doesn't matter, because I can easily just damage boost my way to where I need to be. Now I know that at least in the first case, a lot of these puzzles would either be way too easy or couldn't even exist if they solved this issue, but that doesn't mean that it should be ignored. It's like the developers noticed it, but it was too late, so they said, just make it a mechanic. Anyways, another small flaw I'd like to mention is that the controls for entering doorways and picking up boxes feel like they should be reversed. I know this is such a small issue, I shouldn't even mention it, but it really does feel awkward. You press down to interact with doors, NPCs, and so on, and to pick up boxes, you have to stand on top of them and press up. Why do I have to stand on top of them? That makes no sense and once again can make certain puzzles feel silly. So overall, should you play Iconoclasts? Absolutely. It's a roller coaster of emotions though. This game can make you laugh and not even 5 minutes later make you want to cry. Certainly one of the best games I've played so far in 2018, and it's only $20 on Steam, so go buy it. I'll put a link in the description below as always. Thank you so much for watching everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. A new Year of Kirby video is coming out next week, so stay tuned for that, and as always, have a wonderful rest of your day.